Good morning, VOXOLOGY podcast. Seth here. I'm my dudes, Mike and Tim.
My dudes, Mike and Tim.
And
dudes.
it's a figure about us, VOXOLOGYpodcast.com. I love the paper.
You love the people. Yep.
I love you guys. And I bless you all, guys.
And bless you all, guys. Nice. Sevi. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the first day of summer. Seth Erie graduated 8th grade today.
Yeah, yo.
His very own certificate of graduation. There was a cake involved. He's on his way to Zaxby's now to celebrate triumphantly with his sweet mom. So it's a big day in the Erie household. Seth Erie crushed it.
Seth Erie is going to be a high school student.
He's going to be a high school student.
It's crazy.
My friend. Yep. I mean, yeah, it is utterly crazy. And he's ready. He's ready. Now he's marching on the YouTubes. He's marching back and forth. Yeah, seriously. And we're back. Okay, we're leaving.
Bye, Dad.
See, love you. My other son, Nate, is asking me if we want to play Fortnite right now. Nate.
Just Erie chaos.
I mean, how great is it to have so Nate is 20, he's in college, obviously. And he loves to play Fortnite with me. So
that was great.
We play duos together and win. There's some victory crowns in not only in heaven, but on the Fortnite
but
game
also
for
in
us.
Fortnite.
So yeah. How are you today?
Great. I'm ready to rock.
Are you ready to rock?
I'm ready to rock.
I mean, Pearl Jam scouring the western part of the United States.
Yeah, they're playing Bottle Rock tonight.
I don't know what that is.
It's a festival in Napa.
Bottle Rock?
Yeah, it's like wine country.
Ah, yes. When I think of Pearl Jam, I think of White Zinfandel.
Well, I mean, Eddie does drink like 2 bottles of wine every night while they're performing. So,
well, you know what? That's fair. That's actually very true. So, okay, so maybe he is a bit of an expert. Perfect. Otherwise, you're okay. Kids are okay.
Yeah, Mazzy's mad at me because I was supposed to go on a field trip with her today, but I forgot that this is the day we record. So I was like, oh, hey, guess what?
Oh, and there's Justina Erie making an appearance. Oh, so she is mad.
Yeah, she's angry with me. I got to make that up to her.
Wow. So you were willing, for the sake of the VOXOLOGY audience.
That's right, folks.
to
bear the wrath
to
of
disappoint your daughter. Yeah. And just so you know, Seth Erie has an eye for Mazzy. Just now he'll ask about Tim Stafford, and then he'll just Mazzy, and you're like, still there. She's still there. Absolutely. Seth recognizes the spark of awesome that is your daughter.
She is a spark.
Except she's mad. A couple of things. Have we talked about the non-conference, the non-friends? Have we talked about that? It was freaking amazing.
Yeah.
So okay. We have this whole tribe of Patreon and Tidely supporters. And we have a couple of donors who have a very big heart for this, who help too. But we put on for, 16, 17 sort of ministry, vocational folks or close to ministry folks, or I think there was even one person there who sees his job as vocational ministry, but it's not vocational ministry technically from a church or nonprofit. But anyway, we do this thing called the non-conference, or the non-friends for short. And I don't even know how to describe it. It's part therapy, part processing pain, part reconstruction, part humanizing and play, part bearing witness to each other's stories, part gambus.
Heavy Southern food.
Yes. And then, yes, there is heavy Southern food and drink very much involved. Anyway, it was remarkable. So we've done this 2 years in a row, and worth every second. And it couldn't be done without you. And I wish I could tell you some stories, but the stories are
Everything's
I mean, we're
private.
just so proud. We're just so proud of the folks that came and are taking, really incredible steps towards health and wholeness and the whole thing. So anyway, thank you. This was awesome, you guys. This was awesome. And I wish I had a better way to describe it. I just don't. It's just amazing. A picture 4 to 8 hours of people who in that span are strangers who then become, in this really cool kind of way, an interesting family of sorts to kind of walk with out of some unhealth into health, maybe. So all that is to say, wow, Stafford was there, and anyway, it's just great. So thank you for that. Shout out to the Holy Post. I think we talked about that. We did an event at our church, and
You
love
and
being a
Sky
part of it
and David
with their-
French.
Yes. I was hoping for David Ranch, but he wasn't available, so we got
Just had to
David
go with the
French.
French.
So dumb.
David Blue Cheese was out of town too.
So yep. So one of the women who help us at the non-friends emailed in with a gentle correction of yours truly. So can you believe that? First of all, hello, Mike and Tim. What are you laughing at?
I didn't put together who wrote the email. I just read
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I love it even more.
So she's so right on, which hurts me even more. I loved it. This is like one of the greatest humans ever. I won't say her name because I didn't get permission, but anyway, she's great. I love the most recent conversation, and Tim's questions about the cruciform life were very thought-provoking. Way to go, Tim.
Yeah.
However, I have one gentle pushback to something Mike said.
Uh-oh.
The comment was something like, dying for Jesus is easy, it's living for Jesus that is hard. And while I absolutely agree with the point you were making, unfortunately, I think this is one of those times that the statement doesn't really say what you were trying to say. I mean, I've probably said or at least thought similar things in the past, but then quite a few years ago, I became close personal friends with someone for whom dying for Christ was not just a theoretical exercise. My friend was a pastor in Nigeria who worked with many churches across the country and lived with death threats on his head every day. Watching him walk out faithfully in this context was the most humbling education I can imagine. I think it's easier for us to think that dying for Jesus is easier than it is when there's very little chance of us ever being faced with that decision. In actual practice, it's absolutely brutal, and one rarely, if ever, is made in a moment. That is made in a moment. Now, to your point, dying for Christ almost never happens if you aren't already living for Christ. But even in that case, it's usually a hard decision at the end of a long line of other hard decisions. It's that long obedience in the same direction, as Eugene Peterson says. I completely agree with the point you were making, but I think the way it came out accidentally minimizes what people who actually face dying for Christ go through. Maybe a better way to put this would be something like dying for Christ would be incredibly difficult, but there is no way any of us would ever be willing to actually die for Christ if we can't live for him first. So, and she ends, I just don't think this is one of those statements that doesn't translate from comfortable American Christianity to actual persecution, real persecution.
Real persecution, yeah.
Yeah.
Not the American Christianity persecution. Exactly.
And man, you are so utterly and absolutely right. I get how that came out trite. What was in my head was I don't know why, but I've always been, I always want to be seen as heroic, or at least that's been true of me in the past. And so, heroically dying for Jesus, I was trying to poke fun at myself by saying, if it's glorious and heroic, I'm all in. But if it's like daily dying to self, like the American consumer that I am, it's actually, harder. But your point, absolutely well taken. And that is a messy statement that I made. So consider myself pushed back gently. I'm now back because I have been gently pushed. So thank you. I totally agree. And you're right. Yep. That sounds just so American and comfortable and consumer. And Tim, you should have seen Tim's face when I said it. Yeah, I know.
Just recoiled.
Exactly. Yes. But anyway, no, seriously, thank you. That was great, as always, and we adore you. All right, Tim, you want to talk about the Pope. You have a thing about the Pope that you want to talk about. And this is midway between banter and content, because we've got a couple of emails that have said, hey, I actually like the banter that you kind of gradually kind of warm up into the content for the day. We have other folks that are like, yeah, I'm fine skipping forward 20 minutes and missing all of it. And you know what? It's your choice. It's great. It's all going to be there. But this is midway. This is banter. This is not banter. It's not content, but it's bantent. It's something else. Anyway, Pope, tell us.
Well, now I can't find the article. I can't remember where I sent it to you on.
Oh,
but
come on. Stafford.
the
Speaking of
gist
Pope,
of it-
Stafford's head is uncovered today, and his hair is magnificent. Man, I'm jealous.
I have to
And
chop it
that-
off.
No,
No, I
don't
did.
ever
I
do
cut
that,
like a
man.
foot off of it.
That's chopped right there.
Yeah, it was
Man,
like
that
down
is
to here.
glorious. It is full. Okay, you make me happy. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm sure most people saw it. He did a CNN interview, and it covered various topics. He had lots to say about American Christians, which was also interesting, and kind of has to do in some ways with the email that you just read. But one thing that he said, and I wish that I could read it to you word for word, but I lost it, was something along the lines of...
There's a high degree of preparation.
I had it pulled up, and then my phone went to the locked screen, and then now I don't know where it was.
Come on.
But he said something to the effect of like, humans are inherently good, or that's not the exact words. Fundamentally good. Yeah, that was an important word. And sure, there are like sinners and rogues running around or something like that. But then in the interview itself, he kind of lists a few things of like mothers in these certain situations and different people who just do good. And so on Facebook, and the Chiefs kicker that also gave the commencement speech, he's Catholic and was at a Catholic school. So it's prompted all these conversations about Protestants getting mad at Catholics.
Okay.
Or Catholics like the kicker, who's holding a more American Protestant belief, because the Benedictine sisters came out and kind of pushed back on the kicker, and it made this interesting conversation about different tribes of faith. But I thought, as we're doing the human stuff, especially we've touched on how so many of us were raised in a system that told us that we are born terrible, we are terrible, we are capable of nothing good, and that's what the grace of God is. Like, even though you're a complete piece of crap, guess what? Jesus will still pull you out of the crap, and blah blah blah. And the Pope is kind of saying something a little bit different than that, and I thought it was interesting because are we born terrible, or are we born, is the human spirit, what we are, as how we're made, good, but it can become corrupted by the world and the systems that are around us?
So which is more fundamental to our humanity? The Imago Dei that was declared good, or the sinful nature that corrupts the Imago Dei?
What was it? What was the word? Selim?
Is
that the statue word, right?
And
I remember a few things.
Look at you go. And it seems like the answer is yes. Like humans are not as bad as they could be, but they're not as good as they should be. And it's like,
well, it's like the nature and nurture conversation, right? Are we born, is our nature bad, or is it how we're nurtured in the world that corrupts us and brings in selfishness and lust and greed?
I do think, I mean, if you put it that way, like I didn't have to teach my kids to be selfish. I didn't have to teach my kids to like want to harm if they're frustrated with their sibling. Like that came pretty naturally. Now I don't know. I mean, that, I don't even know if that's a legitimate observation or not, but it was just more like, I'm kind of on the, if someone were going to press me, I'd say no. I think that there's a corrupted part of human nature that's true of all humans kind of under the fall. But I think it's vastly overstated by some who will not acknowledge the good that people do apart from Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like, so yeah. So if you have a view of sin that says people can't do good unless they're Christian, man, I'm out of that conversation.
Yeah,
like
and that's
crazy.
been proven wrong all throughout history.
Well, yeah. And what good does Christian do for most people? It actually, in some cases, makes us worse. Yeah. So I do think that's interesting. Which is more fundamental? And if I had to pick one, I would say Imago Dei is more fundamental. We would cease being human if the Imago Dei left. We would not cease being human if sin was removed.
In fact, we'd be more human.
But I also wouldn't want to say that humans can rescue themselves if they just knew better. Like I think what sin means is that shalom has been violated and it's beyond our ability to repair it. At its source, at its root. Of course, we can repair it by apologizing, lamenting, all the things. But at its root, it is beyond the human scalpel to excise.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what I'd say, but I don't know. I think that's a really great point. I love when you find this stuff.
Well, this is the kind of stuff I think, for some reason, I've been thinking a lot about how all the disciples died. Something keeps cycling through in my news feed somewhere where it's like,
wow.
He was crucified upside down. He was skinned alive.
I heard you talking about cruciformity.
Yeah.
Alexa's listening.
Google's like, hey, I got something for you.
Yeah.
This, I was thinking about something like, so when I saw the Pope's thing, the first thing I thought of for some reason was 9/11. And I was thinking about how that is just this huge atrocity that was committed by humans, but the human response to it in New York and around the world and stuff was fundamentally different. And it was very good. And it was, and our natural reaction, like our innate natural reaction, was to serve and to help and to run into the mess and stuff. And I was like, I wonder if we are fundamentally good. And that's part of what Jesus was trying to model, was you can choose into this continually as pressures and things kind of collide in on you, as the sin of the world, so to speak, kind of comes in and tries to corrupt or distract, or the powers and the principalities are trying to cause chaos and pull your vision aside. Maybe that happens because we are fundamentally good, but there's so much chaos and evil trying to pull elsewhere, if that makes sense.
I think so. I don't know. I wouldn't understand fundamental goodness that way.
Yeah.
It seems, I don't know if this is true. I'm saying it seems because of sin, the default setting is flesh, not spirit. And so when Jesus says you have to be born again, like that's like very much a true thing. Like it's not that we're very good, but choose the bad. It's that there's something in us that either wants to redefine good and bad, or like has a bias towards, what is often the worst for us. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I mean, this isn't. So it depends what fundamental means. If fundamental describes moral behavior, are we fundamentally good or bad? I mean, I don't know how you weigh that out. But if it's which is more important to our humanity, that's clear. It's Imago Dei is far more fundamental in that sense. But I love the question, because you're right. There is this worm sort of theology that gets a lot of play, where the first thing you have to do is convince people they're sinners, and then you present Jesus as the result. And that may have been effective in other, or at least gained a hearing in other generations. I just don't think that's language today that speaks. I think I was reading research actually yesterday that talked about how the atonement language that speaks now is reconciliation and restoration. Because I think we know that we should be good.
Exactly.
I think that's true. Like there are echoes of goodness that like kind of reverberate in the human community that we're like, why aren't we like this all the time?
Yeah.
After 9/11, you know? So I don't know. And then Paul's language of being enslaved to the powers, I don't know what that means in terms of goodness or badness. I think our default setting maybe is what's at issue, and that's why the born again language becomes. But we're still image bearers, so we can choose the good. I don't know. Thanks, Tim. That was great.
Yeah. Well, and then we talked about it a little while ago too, like when we were talking about, this was a different topic, but similar with rhetorical language, like God is good. And it's like, well, what is the definition of good? Like It's going to be different to different people around the planet. It's going to be different in different time periods. What does that mean? And why are we trying to go for a 2-dimensional answer when it's probably more of a 4-dimensional answer?
Yeah. Yep. Boom. I just want to pause and say, I'm shocked people listen to this. I'm continually like, I've met some podcast listeners just in the wild.
Yeah.
And I'm always shocked. They seem intelligent and nice, and they have so many things they could do with their free time. And somehow they've gotten involved here.
I would listen to this podcast for this conversation. I like the reality of the whole thing. Like, I'm so tired of just being told, memorize this verse or understand these rhetorical ideas. It's just like, I want to know what it really means in the real world. And I think
you're a thread puller.
Kind of stuff. Yeah,
bro, you're a thread puller. If that's an Enneagram number, that's yours.
Yeah.
Number 10, thread puller. And speaking of pulling threads, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pull some stuff out of my patootie today. We have to finish Power. We have to. Because this was not supposed to be a detour of weeks. This was just there was going to be one topic on rule.
I know. That's why I'm running out of episode titles.
I know. Seriously.
You can only say power in so many different ways.
So many. Austin Power.
Well, there it is.
There it is. Okay. So we ended was it last week? Last episode?
I don't know where we are.
I don't know.
Who are you?
I don't know where we are. Hello? I think we ended last episode with the idea that the church should forsake all power over. That there could be a place in time for power over in the non-redemptive purposes of God to restrain violence, preserve life. We're glad for traffic lights and traffic laws, but they don't redeem anybody. And that the church, as the community putting forward the new creation dynamics, present now, but to be, in their fullness later, should resist the way that Jesus and Paul do any expression of power over. The problem in the church is that power over is the predominant way of still seeing power. And so in the church, it's just, is there good accountability? That's the issue. The issue isn't, hey, have we adopted an entirely wrong view of power? The issue is, hey, we know what power is. Let's just make sure it's used well. And Fitch's genius in his book, Reckoning with Power, has been, no. There's a whole nother power that that the church is supposed to be using and employing that makes room for God's work, whereas power over does not. So I want to talk about the church and power today. And I want to talk about it from multiple perspectives. I want to talk about it first as a church leader myself, and how I've experienced and been tempted by the one ring to rule them all. I want to talk about it as an attender, what you should look for in churches. I want to talk about we do have a surprising number of folks that lead or serve in religious or nonprofit organizations that for whom some of this might be super relevant. So I just want to start by remembering that Fitch's point, and what he argues is Jesus and Paul's point, is that power over should never be employed by the church ever. And that power over can be expressed in positional titles, in statements for and against things, in organizational roles where money is attached, in manipulation or coercion, or I'm God's anointed. I mean, all of those can be expressions of power over. Even the title, senior pastor or bishop or elder or whatever. And so what I want to do is I want to start by saying, I've had to learn, because my inherited pastoral world was the megachurch. And in the megachurch, the model of leadership is the CEO. And so I had, at different points, I had staff. At the highest, I had 120 staff. But even that language, I had staff. I mean,
Right.
it's so like, it's all power over stuff. 20 acres and $6 or $7 million budgets or whatever. And I had a parking space. I had a security team. I had a shower in my office. I had an assistant who was wonderful and, just took care of all sorts of details. But all of those subtly or not so subtly reinforced that I was kind of the most valuable part of the organization. And just, I hate that there are parts of me that love that.
Sure.
and believe that I'm special and awesome and deserving of all sorts, those sorts of things. And I just remember, being mentored by other pastors saying, listen, man, the best gift you give to the church is your attention to the preaching and leading. And so, there are other people who are like running and getting you lunch, other people who are, picking up and running errands. I mean, that's a horrible use of the church's time. And so you need to be dialed in and most effective for the church. And one of the things that I've since learned is that, we're never called to be effective. We're called to be faithful. And faithful means, as we'll see, putting off power over and all the expressions of hierarchy, and instead opening myself to the not only the Spirit's work with people, but respecting the Spirit's work in them. It's not just, it is a flat communal structure is the ideal. So, power over, I just think should be laid down entirely in churches. That is my absolute and utter conviction. And one of the reasons it's not is because we don't measure the fruit of people's spirit. We measure the fruit of their ministries. So we have examples like James McDonald's or Mark Driscoll or Bill Hybels, or dozens of others who their behavior was excused because of the great things happening in their ministry. And I remember I had the audacity to speak out against Mark Driscoll early. This is somebody I've really struggled with personally. And was just in a public forum saying, this is not okay. What he's doing is not okay. And somebody just pushed back, saying, but look at all the people coming to Jesus. And I just remember thinking the critique isn't the fruit of his ministry. The critique is the fruit of his spirit. And if the two aren't aligned, that's a problem. And can God use jackasses? Well, of course, he uses me. He uses literal jackasses in the Bible. So yes, of course he can.
Unequivocally, yes.
Yes. But are those the people that we want or God wants in leadership? Man, that's a whole different thing. So power. So I just need to start by confessing my own complicity in power over. And that power over can be authoritarian, or it can just be positional. It can be hierarchical. It can be like, look how important I am. And that was the stuff that was really alluring, to me. There was this sense of, I am like a coach that's, been a coordinator. It's time to be a head coach, and there was a legit part of me I thought about it. So when we talk about,
nothing has been more revealing than how easily Christians moved into influencer roles.
Oh,
because it's not we'll any different. Yeah.
No, we'll get to that. Absolutely. So I want to start first as a leader, as a repenting leader, but I'm still a church leader. I'm a teaching pastor. And so the hierarchy, the power over has to be resisted from those who are encouraged to wield it. And that means the elders, the personalities, the celebrity pastors, the whatever. Like there's a sense that we have to start by resisting all effects and all displays of power over. And so I want to reflect a little bit on something Jesus says about the very respectable religious leaders of his day, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. He speaks 7 woes famously against the Pharisees and the scribes, and he's not denigrating Judaism. We don't have to make Judaism look bad to make Jesus look good. He's not denigrating all Pharisees or scribes, but he is talking to a subset who rejected him as Messiah and who taught others to reject him as Messiah, who were so hard-hearted that they would rather attribute his work to like this ancient adversary than to admit that like this was from God. And so Jesus in the prophetic tradition of Isaiah or Jeremiah has harsh words against, or Ezekiel has harsh words against the religious leadership. And one of these, he starts off, we're not even into a woe yet, but one of the things he says speaks to this love of hierarchy and power over. He says, everything they do is for people to see. They make their phylacteries. Phylacteries are boxes of Bible verses. Like they're little boxes that have like wrappings around them, and you would wrap them so that it would be on your hand, or wrap them. You'll see them on the forehead.
Yeah.
They make their phylacteries wide, and we're not sure what exactly that means. We think that means you were supposed to wear them only twice a day for prayer. That making your phylacteries wide was a way of wearing them beyond the appointed times to show how devout you were. And they would also make their tassels on their garments long. The shawls that they would have tassels on them, and there was a certain length. If you had longer ones, it was just an expression of how pious you were. So Jesus says everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and be called rabbi by others. And so Jesus, I mean, there are three things here that he points out. They involve dress, position, and greeting. And so they flaunt their piety in the way they wear their phylacteries and their fringes. They seek out praise and honorific titles in a scramble for social rank. Their professional influence is used only for self-aggrandizement, right? They're not serving others. They're wanting to be seen and appreciated by others. And they want to be exalted by other people rather than serve them as their slaves, kind of the idea. And so, Jesus is pointing out all the earmarks of like bad spiritual authority. Bad spiritual authority stresses position and authority. Bad spiritual authority expects and demands loyalty and respect. So you'll get this in some churches. You'll get pastors saying, well, this person isn't loyal. This person doesn't get it.
Right.
And what they mean by that is they're not loyal to my program, agenda,
Exactly.
vision, whatever. Bad leadership privileges a few above all others, and bad leadership seeks social prestige. And so, one of the things that Jesus points out is that bad spiritual leaders will stress their position, their authority. They will demand, and expect compliance, and they will have markers of their importance to the church.
Sounds relevant.
And so Jesus, yeah, totally. So Jesus gives 3 recommendations. One of them is found like in the next verse, and then 2 others are found elsewhere, but you'll see why I'm doing what I'm doing. The first one he says is stop using titles altogether. So this is literally the next verse. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher. You are all brothers, excuse me. You're not to be called rabbi. You are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, what's interesting is rabbi, father, and instructor are all words that the Pharisees would use to describe different kinds of teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus isn't saying, don't call your father, father. He's saying, don't give positions of hierarchy and authority to people who stand as if they were in God's place, using God's voice, when it actually, the Messiah, your Messiah, Jesus, is the one who's teaching and fathering and instructing. You know what I mean? It's absolutely countercultural. Like, even rabbi, which he's called many times in the Gospels. He just says, do not use titles to give others or yourself social prestige. So I think of people that it's called a doctor of ministry. It's not a PhD, it's a doctor of ministry. It's a 3-year seminary cohort program. And then they insist on being called doctor.
Right.
It's not a legit doctorate, not even remotely. Or I've been around pastors that insist I'm pastor or most reverend or whatever. And Jesus couldn't be clearer on the fact that's an expression of hierarchy and power over, and we're all brothers.
Yeah,
ladies
it's like
and
the
gentlemen.
Reverend Tim Gombis. Everywhere he goes, it's just like Reverend.
Dude, he is so he is who this is addressed to.
Right.
That guy insists on so much. But even those of us who would, like, I've had people say, listen, this is how I was taught. I was taught to say Pastor Mike.
Totally.
I have a towel that I use to wipe my face that says, don't call me pastor, that someone in our church gave us. Because I hate it. Anyone calls me pastor, I'm like, nope, my name's Mike, end of story. But the pushback is, hey, sometimes, I'm teaching my kids to call people doctor, pastor, whatever. And I'm like, great, as long as that doesn't imply any sense of importance or hierarchy in your eyes or your kids' eyes. Because if it does, then I want to resist it automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, great. I'm a pastor. Fantastic. If that is in any way taken to mean closer to God, more holy, whatever, then we have to resist the titles. And so I just think, brother and sister are kind of the best way to go on these sorts of things. But notice, you're all brothers. Stop. There are no experts in the freaking kingdom of God. You're just brothers.
Yeah.
Some of you have gifts, but all of those gifts were distributed by God. So what are you claiming them for your own? So his first recommendation, remember, they love titles and the greetings and the seats and the way they dressed. First thing he says is resist all titles. No titles in the kingdom. Secondly, instead of fighting for the seats of honor, Jesus constantly recommends take the place of lowest social honor deliberately. So here's one example of that. One Sabbath, Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. Here we go again. He was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal this man on the Sabbath or not? They remained silent. Jesus took hold of the man, healed him, sent him on his way. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table. Now remember, who you eat with is who you are. And where you eat in first century meals is a demonstration of your social ranking. So meals are performances. They're social performances of hierarchy.
Right.
So Jesus notes where some of them sat. And he said this parable to them. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place first, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. And then he makes the same point that he did about the titles. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So instead, don't go sitting in the privileged seats. Don't go looking for prestige and influence. Don't take the seats of honor. Refuse all entitlements and liberty. No one gets to put you on a pedestal. One of the healthiest signs of mature godly leadership is taking on purpose the lowest social place. That's why Paul, we've talked about this all the time. Paul will say, I am a slave of Christ Jesus, the lowest social place. Or he'll work in, like we talked about, last episode, where he'll work with his hands, even though that was considered beneath him. He'll do it so he's not a burden on the Corinthians. So first thing, these Pharisees, man, they love the titles of honor and greetings. Jesus says, no titles for my people. These Pharisees, they love the seats of honor. Jesus says, yeah, but what you really should be doing there is actively taking the place of lowest social honor. Pharisees love to be seen doing the things. So Jesus, of course, has a whole thing in Matthew 6 about people being seen doing things. And the point he's making isn't that it's wrong to be seen doing good things. Rather, it's wrong to be doing good things in order to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward in heaven, or no reward from your Father in heaven. I mean, you could not be clearer.
Yeah.
Right? But the church context I was complicit in and I inherited, none of these things applied. Oh my goodness. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Again, give to the needy, hallelujah. But if you're only doing it to be honored by others, that's the problem. Truly, they've received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
Now, how do you think that works from a corporate setting? Because we've been in these churches where
yeah.
Hey guys, we just want to give you an update to celebrate. You guys raised X amount of money for some shelter in town. You guys did that. You're such a blessing to these people. It becomes this rally of hyping up. And I've always felt really icky in those situations, but they did do all this. I don't know. You know what I mean? So it was one thing to say, hey, I went out and I served personally, and not let my left hand know, blah, 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 blah. But in a corporate setting, how do you feel about that in the big church?
I think that there's a difference between, there are different ways you can announce it. There are ways that will draw attention to the church and how great we are, or there are ways that I think could better provoke conversation and adoration around how beautiful Jesus is.
Yeah.
And what he wants for our community. So I think it would depend on, I think there are times, I think there are people who will donate to Vox, and I will absolutely thank them. Mm-hmm. Absolutely thank them. But we're not going to announce them.
Right.
We used to announce everyone that came on to Patreon, and I don't know. It was I was sort of mixed about that. It helped generate other Patreon folks, but it's also not that anyone was doing to get their name on this stupid podcast. There's, of course not.
Well, but it always made me think about when you go to why do you clothe or feed someone who does not have a home or food? Do you do it because they are a human who's deserving of dignity and is deserving of those things? Or are you doing it because you think it's the whatever, you know what I mean? And then how you respond to that service or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Are you learning more about how you can continually dignify other human beings, or is it just hey, look what we did?
Yeah. Yeah. And then what social media does is, hey, here we are on this mission trip, guys. Look at us helping these poor people. Man, that there is so much to that.
Yeah.
There is so much to that. Our public performance of piety, good Lord. And so
what does he say in that verse? That's your
reward.
Your reward.
You want your likes and clicks? Great, you got them. That's it.
Congratulations.
And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen. They have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, pray to your Father who is unseen, then your Father who sees what is in secret. So hey, they love the positions of honor. You choose my people. You choose the place of lowest honor. They do everything in order to be seen. You practice hiddenness. Absolutely. And again, it's not bad getting seen. It's bad when you do things to be seen. Right. And then titles. Now we're not doing titles anymore, guys. Not if they communicate any amount of social prestige or power over or hierarchy. I mean, it could not be clearer, right? So Jesus, here's his recommendation to the American church, if at least to American church leaders. All right. Number one, abolish status markers and privileged hierarchy. Instead, practice siblingship. Number two, refuse to build platforms of social prestige. Instead, choose the place of lowest honor. And number three, avoid public performance of piety. Instead, practice in hiddenness and in secret.
Uh-oh.
Like, there you go.
Yeah.
And this word, man, that is a word to me, and that is a word to American church leadership, right? That's it. So we can talk about power over all day, but resisting it means giving up this stuff, status markers and privilege, and embracing siblingship. Like ceasing to build platforms of social prestige. Now, if they're platforms of service or platforms of awareness, I mean, that's different. But if it's a platform of social prestige, maybe. I mean, Paul, I don't know that Paul, when he would write the letters, he would write them in a way that they didn't glorify himself. You know what I mean? Like, I think there are ways
Paul's
that you
letters,
can
do you think in his mind he meant for us all to be reading these letters? And so I mean, I think is maybe important to the context of how we read them. Maybe. But here fundamentally, and again, I'm speaking about me, but I also am projecting. I had I think I've talked about this. Yes, I'm sure I've talked about this. The question a spiritual director or therapist asked me, whose wounds are you trying to heal when you teach? I think I've talked about that. Yeah.
And what that therapist meant was that so much of my identity and so much of my validation and significance was wrapped up in how I did as a teacher in front of, thousands of people with multiple services or whatever, that my teaching was no longer in any way, shape, or form about gospeling or bringing healing or whatever to other people. It was all about validating myself and fighting against the sense of shame, that's kind of been around forever in my own life. And so I think one of the things that is very, very hard to recognize is that wounded and needy people are often drawn to ministry, like vocational ministry. I'm not saying everybody in ministry is wounded and needy. I'm saying loads of us who go into it are wounded and needy. If you're wounded and your ego needs buttressing, I mean, what better place to get attention and affection or feel some kind of worth than to take on the role of speaking for God or ministering God's word or being a part of something eternal, right? This is one of the easiest places to be put on a pedestal and get accolades. And those things, even though our egos love them, they're disastrous and they're massively dysfunctional.
They're drugs.
Because wounded people, wound people. I mean, that's kind of how it works. And so when she said that to me, whose wounds are you trying to heal? That didn't mean everything I taught was bad or that my motives in teaching were bad. But subconsciously, the reason I would sit down after a service and worry about how I did was because I was getting life from my performance rather than getting life from union with Christ and relationships with others and, and health and wholeness. I was feeding off of the sheep rather than feeding the sheep, if you will. And I hate being this honest about myself. I really do. I really don't like talking about myself in these ways, but I hate more coming across as somebody who just wants to take shots at the American church and who hasn't benefited but also, I mean, I'm a recovering one of these kinds of people.
Totally.
And there are ways that we're going to talk about that health can be found in the midst of all of this. But when we start with power in the church, why does the church embrace power over? And it's because we as leaders want it, love it, appreciate it. It validates us. It makes us feel important. That's the biggest obstacle, is that the metaphors, the leadership pictures, the books that we've read all have a pyramid at which we're the top. Now, we can preach servant leadership. We can preach the least is the greatest. No one believes it, and we never practice it, at least in the church settings I've been in. At the very top of the pyramid, yes, you can say it was Jesus, but it was whoever the senior personality was.
Well, and what are we seeing just across the board is that wounded, needy, whatever.
Yep.
But then in the position of having to segment your public and private self, which we've talked about a lot. So you may be wounded and needy, but you cannot show any of that. What happens?
Right.
Well, that private self implodes at some point, which then it's just what a disaster of a model.
What a disaster. Exactly. And the thing about hypocrisy is, the better are you, the sicker you are, the better you look. You know what I mean? Like if your sickness is having to look good when you're not really good, then the sicker you are, the better you are.
Yeah.
At hiding.
The sicker you
know
get.
what I mean? What's that?
And the sicker you get in the process.
And the sicker, and I mean, he goes on to describe the ways the Pharisees polluted others because of their bad religion. So often wounded and needy people will go into vocational ministry. Sometimes evil people will go into vocational ministry.
Power.
I mean, there's a thin line between sickness and evil sometimes. And what better place if you want to control, if you want to divide, if you want to feed anger, like what better place than to speak with God's voice?
Yeah.
I mean, so
you can't argue with that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm God's anointed. You can't question it. So we live in this tension in the American church. The Bible does talk about leadership. It does. Like it's yes, we're all brothers in terms of significance and hierarchy, but there is a hierarchy of responsibility where some are more responsible for the health of the community than others. That's true. So like teachers in the book of James, do not be a teacher because they will be judged more harshly. And that's why Jesus goes after the religious leaders of Israel. He wasn't going after all of the Israelites.
Right.
Because there is something about the religious leadership. There's a greater degree of responsibility, certainly not importance, but responsibility.
Yeah.
So we're stuck with the idea that there are elders and that there are people who, are helping to clarify the center of what the church should be and do. But at the same time, there's so much sickness and awfulness, not only because of the way the church operates, but the kind of people who are attracted to the way the church operates. And so if we're going to talk about throwing down power over in the church, it has to start with the people supposedly at the top of the pyramid, resisting in the same way that Jesus did, all of the small and all of the big ways that power over can be put on display. Now, for those of us who attend churches, I have some thoughts about the kind of church you should look for. Because if we agree that power over is not an expression, an authentic Jesus-like expression of power in the church, then that means that that we have to look for other dynamics at play, and these are often more subtle. So, and there we have people in our church who will ask, like, well, okay, if I can't trust my religious leaders, who can I trust?
Yeah, totally.
And my response is, don't trust individuals, trust communities. Trust communities, don't trust individuals. And trust communities that value four things above all others. They value mutuality, they value plurality, they value humility, and they value weakness and vulnerability. So I want to hit these real quick. And I think the reason I'm comfortable being at the church I'm at, and the reason I'm comfortable exercising my gift, but also my leadership is because I'm in a church that values these things, and I'm somebody who is an advocate for this, but I also benefit from this, because this is some of the healthiest stuff I've ever been around.
The definition of community.
I mean, you'd think so. So mutuality is the resistance to hierarchy. That's when Jesus goes, hey, you're all brothers. So mutuality is when we pay attention to the social distinctions of importance that the world makes around us, so that those can be purposefully resisted in the church.
Yeah.
So for instance, James writes, a chapter's worth on do not favor the rich. The rich should be grieving their low position, while the poor should be rejoicing in their high position. What that means, I don't know if it's grieving in their low position or if it's, I don't remember how exactly he says it, but there's a dynamic that exists where those that are deemed less important in culture are lifted up, and those who are deemed more important in culture are brought low, so that we might all share a common table as siblings, of whom there is no, greater or lesser.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, yeah. Yep.
So mutuality is when we're practicing mutual submission, where it's not just one voice, where it's not power over. Decisions are made collaboratively. Power is distributed. And that, Paul does this. Man, Paul takes the most power-laden relationship, the wealthy land-owning husband, and redefines husband, father, and master, so that there is mutuality between husband and children, husband and wife, husband or master and slave.
Right.
I mean, it's the most brilliant redistribution of social hierarchy and ordering in the history, and in history. And that the common table was the prophetic symbol and sign of mutuality. We're all brothers. And so it's a common table. It's when Peter left the common table and ate only with Jews, Paul said, you are no longer aligning with the truth of the gospel.
Aren't we thankful for Peter for always modeling it for us to learn?
Oh, I love that guy. Yes. Plurality means that power is distributed and there isn't one central person that has all the authority, access to money, all the things. There isn't a celebrity name. There isn't a pedestal with one person on it. Power is distributed just as gifts are distributed, and that all gifts are equally honored, not just one or two highlighted. Because when you go to the American church, the only things that are highlighted are leadership, teaching, and singing.
Yeah.
Those are the only gifts. If you've got the gift of mercy, we're grateful for you, but no one's highlighting that thing, right? Or you're just somebody who's really great at business. I don't know what spiritual gift that is, but you're just great at business, and there's loads of integrity, and you've kept the church from falling into all sorts of pitfalls.
Gosh, it's so interesting though, because the main reason that I walked away from leading worship for like 10 years was actually because I felt that my reward was the accolade of being on stage, like playing well and singing well, and not that was what the congregation was offering back, but no, it's just the performance of that. And I felt that in teaching too, whereas like I stopped teaching at churches for a while because I got so burnt out by the format, where it's just like warm them up, give them content, let's bring it all home. And I was like, this all feels like, but when you talk about someone who has the gift of mercy, well, that's behind the scenes. So they're not getting that reward in that way. It's just so interesting.
And the church doesn't honor them. I mean, or we'll give verbiage. And again, I'm just speaking of my tribe.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are exceptions everywhere. But I'm trying to make a big point to say the biggest obstacle about getting rid of power over in the church is not only the form the church takes, but the kind of people who are drawn to that form, who sit at the top of whatever pyramid there is.
And the people that are brought in are formed by that.
Yes, it's a self-reinforcing cycle.
Yeah.
Wounded people get attracted to places where they feel important.
Mhm.
Once they feel important, they cement that sense of importance through tangible displays of hierarchy, superiority, and the exercise of power over.
Well,
Right? And then, yeah, go ahead.
well, just to tie it into the to the Pope thing at the beginning, if I'm a wounded person, if I'm carrying a whole huge backpack of shame around, and I find out that I'm welcome in this place, but I am not worthy of it, or
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, it is a weird self-fulfilling cycle that just keeps going and going and going, where it's like, I need that pastor who is holier than me
Yes.
to be
Yes.
my like
That's
gatekeeper
right.
or whatever. Like,
Listen, churches are complicit in the pedestal making.
right.
It's easier to follow someone who's following Christ than to follow Christ. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, totally.
No doubt. No doubt. Let me get through two more.
Yeah.
Real quick. So plurality, mutuality, weakness and vulnerability. Now here's what I mean. I had a pastor give me some great advice. He's like, don't ever be the hero of all your stories. And it was like, that was just absolute genius. God's power does not rest on our techniques of worldly power. The techniques that we are dependent upon, the techniques that organize big events or social justice projects, children's and teens programs, sweet budgets and smoke machines, like there's just, we all know this, but the reason we don't see more of God's power is we make so much of our own. God's power rests at the end of ours, and it's made perfect in weakness. And the church in America, by and large, does not boast in its weakness. The church, at least my tribe, boasts in its strength. We're the fastest growing church in the country. We heard we're one of the top 50 fastest growing church. The lists and rankings. I mean, we follow a Jesus who says, don't effing rank anything. And then Outreach Magazine has a list of the 50,
Right,
50
totally.
biggest churches or 50 fastest growing churches. And we all just look at that and say, that's normal. Like, this is insanity. This is the upside down. And so my point in bringing up weakness and vulnerability is does everyone have to be perfect? Is there permission to ask questions, to doubt, to limp? Do the leaders limp? Are they honest? Do people welcome authenticity, or do they demand perfection? And then humility, man. A grand announcement of the church isn't about how great the church is.
Right.
And so if your church talks about how great it is, get out. Like, there are four things. And I'm not even talking about orthodoxy. I'm just saying, is there mutuality, plurality, weakness and vulnerability, and humility? If so, then power over is at least being resisted.
Yeah.
If there's not those things, then the church just becomes another expression of power over. That's all it is. And it's only a matter of time until the culture breaks or the character of the person at the top breaks.
Yeah. And I like the word resist because it's active.
Like,
it's not just
it is a
statement.
constant.
Yeah, it's not just a statement of posture. It is a ongoing, like, we have to continue to resist these models and temptations and
other ways. And I'm going to wrap this sucker up. But other things that need to be resisted. Any like classic construals of missions and evangelism need to be rethought, because power over is expressed when we're the ones coming, doing the saving. We're the ones with the money. We're the ones with the technology. We're the ones with the leadership. We're the ones. And any sense of that has to be resisted. Any sense of like evangelism, man, the threat of hell, that's power over.
Yeah.
I'm a Bible expert and you're not. Coercion, manipulation, guilting, shaming. I mean, you look at how Jesus and Paul shared their faith, and it's nothing like so many of the systems that we've expressed that somehow reinforce the superiority that I'm in and you're out. I'm found, you're lost. I'm sheep, you're goat. I also think we have to be very careful around using statements. Here's a statement on human sexuality, or here's a statement on gender, or whatever it is. Now, I get I have a dear friend of mine who really pushes back at me on this and says, no, you do need statements. So I'm open to being wrong. But my experience of statements has been they usually come from leadership. They don't come from the whole church. And they are clarifying often in ways that create an us-them,
Yes.
an insider-outsider, which to me is an expression of power over.
Yeah.
We have the power to determine who's
You're
a part
allowed
of the community
in
and who's not.
if.
Right. And I'm not saying every statement does that, but it's in the nature of statements to do that. Now, again, my dear friend would push back and say, listen, you never want to bait and switch people. And agreed. Like if we hold one view very strongly and then pretend that we don't hold it, that's a bad thing.
Right.
If our view is that we should make room for lots of views, okay, then I don't think that's a bait and switch. However, those are two instances where I think if we're not careful, power over can be put on display. I think there are kinds of statements that are not expressions of power over, but are expressions of power with or power under. Absolutely. I'm not saying all statements are bad. I think some of them are really helpful in clarifying. But I'm just saying, like, you get something like the Nashville statement back years ago, or the impulse to say this is where we stand on X, Y, and Z. And you take a loaded conversation that has all sorts of nuance and complexity, and you reduce it down to some sentences in a paragraph. I just think that's not the love your neighbor work that Jesus had in mind.
Right.
I think it's too easy to just write a statement and say, check, we've honored God and we're good. All right. So that was 12 pages of notes.
So the bottom line
there.
is run your church like PBS. Where you have everybody's a mutual supporter. You have Mr. Rogers preaching friendliness and neighborhood and hospitality and including everybody. And you have Reading Rainbow where it's like, look at this book, but don't take my word for it.
Yeah. Did you see that meme of all like our children's like heroes that each brought something to the table? So Reading Rainbow was on it. Mr. Rogers was on it.
It's all PBS. Even Sesame Street, the monsters are the weird things are the ones that are inviting inclusion and making people feel welcome and evening. I'm gonna run with this PBS thing.
Oh, I think you should. Doctor Who,
Peninsula Bible College, or was it Peninsula Bible Church?
I have no idea. I don't know. All that is to say, oh, that's funny. That's PBS. All that is to say is, look, Tim and I, me to a greater extent, Tim lesser. But we're not sitting over here chucking stones at things. But there is a degree of health that we've both experienced and freedom that I don't know is always possible in the way we've set the thing up.
Yeah.
And so we are people, and guys, this is just true. You need to know this about us. We are absolutely convinced Jesus is amazing. We're absolutely convinced that the Bible is inspired and beautiful. And we're absolutely convinced that the church is one of the most important things that you can be a part of. We also realize that all of those things have been used in ways that have done great harm. And so we want to be sensitive to that. We're both people who've used them badly and been hurt by their bad use. But the biggest thing is to use the natural park metaphor that people are still asking about. Gambas just had this great natural park metaphor back in the day where he was talking about discipleship. Like, what is salvation? Does your world get bigger or smaller when you get saved? And for a lot of us, our world gets smaller. I can only do these things. I can only believe these things. I have to be afraid of science or math or anything that's explicitly not Christian. And I think what Jesus does is Jesus gets bigger the longer we're with him. And all of a sudden you're like, ooh, look at math. That's an expression of the logos, right? Or look at science. You're like, holy moly, like black holes and freaking nebula and all the things. I mean, that's like your world should get bigger.
Yeah.
So the metaphor is that you're at Yellowstone National Park and there's a gift shop at the front of the park, at the park entrance. And you could sit there and look at beautiful photographs, calendars, nooks, crannies, trinkets, that all have representations of Yellowstone. And to a degree, they're true representations of Yellowstone, but they cannot in a million years ever do Yellowstone justice. And how tragic if you thought you were stepping in the national park, but you just settled for the gift shop. Imagine if you stayed in the gift shop for 30 years and then you stepped outside one day and because somebody was leading a tour through the rest of the park. Mm-hmm. How disorienting, how bewildering, how like awe-inspiring that would be. And we think that's a great picture of faith, that Jesus gets bigger, the church and what counts as church gets bigger, what counts as spirituality gets bigger. And that we don't have to be afraid. We're not people living under threat. We're living in God's safe world where there's massive amounts of suffering and evil, from people in Nigeria to I read 2 missionaries today were murdered in Haiti, working in an orphanage. Like, we don't mean safe as in comfortable or easy, but we mean safe as in God actually has the thing going somewhere.
Right.
And we get to be a part of where that goes. So hallelujah. But the big point is that far too many of us settle for religious communities that reflect American values rather than the upside down kingdom values. And we just want to encourage people to keep looking until you find something that almost exclusively uses power with and power under rather than power over.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that the perfect church does not exist, because it's all made up of ding dongs. So it's like I just like, one of the reasons that I appreciate this series or Revelation series or any of those, the Sermon on the Mount series, those series, because for me, what they do for me personally is they're giving me tools in which so that I can know how to posture myself within that community, or I can know how to, like, what's the word? Does that make sense? Like,
orient?
Yeah. Like, I still think that we all enter church buildings hoping to be molded or be told how to function. And that's why those statements get iffy and that kind of stuff. But sometimes if you are coming into a community, you're coming to be a part of something, not to just be a spectator of something.
Right.
Or a patron of something. Right. It's very different. So I just say that because we got a lot of emails of like, hey, I'm in this area. Do you guys know a church? It's like, no, we don't know of churches in every area anywhere.
I wish we did.
We did. And we even talked about trying to put together a directory. But when we started to step into that idea, it was well beyond our means.
Well, and who are we? And who are we to determine?
Exactly. There's no way to know that besides walking along road with a bunch of people. And so it's like, even that idea or that posture of like trying to find the perfect church is already setting yourself up for probably disappointment.
Yes. But there are churches that emphasize being faithful over being effective.
And knowing that's what I mean, like taking some of this to say, going into that building and knowing that this is how we together corporately should operate is much more helpful than being like, how can I find a church that will meet these needs or tell me how to do X, Y, and Z?
Totally, dude. Anyway, that was big and important stuff right at the very end there. So let's just keep walking and
keep on walking,
figuring it out.
It is a long road.
Pearl Jam reference. There should be an episode where we just are doing nothing but Pearl Jam song titles.
Or we should have a bell like Sky's bell for whatever he does for
yeah.
Just for every time there's a Pearl Jam. Ding.
Oh, so good. So yeah, just do the evolution, ladies and gentlemen, particularly in corduroy.
And then you'll be given the fly.
Yes. Yeah. We've lost whatever dozen listeners. We're still here.
Those
love you guys.
Are faithful.
Oh, you're on fire right now.
All right, I'm gonna go into
They're
hiding.
still alive. Yeah. Yeah.
Done.
With our even flow. Okay. Bye.